Hi everyone, welcome to Metal's event series. Today we are going to talk about raising Series A with Metal. For folks who don't know, I am Samir and I lead marketing at Metal. Metal is a YC and A16Z backed platform that helps founders run smarter, more targeted fundraising processes, giving founders high precision intelligence. So, who to target? How do you get warm introductions to those investors? And how do you manage the whole pipeline from start to finish? Recently, we have seen an uptick in number of founders using Metal to raise their Series A rounds. Series A also happens to be one of the toughest graduation rates. So, of all seed funded startups, only 17% make it to Series A. Of all companies that try to raise Series A, about 20% end up successfully raising a round. So we thought that it will be very helpful if we can jump in, talk a bit about and dive deeper into the world of Series A and then also help founders use metal in a better way when they're raising their Series A round. So today I have convinced my friend here, Gul, to come here and talk about his learnings and about metal. For context, Gul is the founder and CEO of Metal. Before starting Metal, Gul raised $120 million across 6 rounds for her first startup and was part of the early teams at DoorDash and Marketo. Some of the investors he raised from are quite top tier. Their first round in 20 VC, and there are a couple of other names out there. Gul, thanks a lot for agreeing to do this. Do you want to introduce yourself and maybe say a few words about why you started Metal when there are so many other tools that provide pipeline or like investor lists and all of that sort?
Yeah, absolutely. Samir, thank you for putting this together and welcome everyone. This is actually the first session we're doing where we talk about our product and about our product strategy. So excited to be here. As Samir mentioned, I raised 120 million for my first startup and raised a Series A round from First Round Capital back in 2019. And with Metal, we've, raised rounds that we haven't announced, but we're backed by recent hardwares and Y Combinator. And today, we want to talk about how we see founders using Metal for their Series A financing. In recent months, we've seen a huge uptake in founders that are raising Series A using Metal, and they consistently share incredible feedback. And so this session is designed to bring out some of the best practices that we see founders doing using Metal.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks a lot. I would love to maybe so there. When you think about the fundraising process, there are a couple of building blocks to that process, and I think we talk about those building blocks quite a lot. So I would love to maybe like dive into the first block here. So every founder, when they're about to go raise, they can think about so many different investors they can go after. So if I were to ask you that if a founder has 200 investors they could go after, they can only run focused process against 40. How do they pick the 40? How do they pick those 30 investors they have to go after? Like, what's the process there?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. So, when we think about Series A, we break down the round into about six subparts. And the first one really is what are the most likely investors for your company? And I want to go back to an anecdote from 2019. So, when I was raising Series A for my first startup, which is a consumer transportation company in Asia, one of the biggest challenges was we had a very high burn, which is very typical of consumer transportation companies. And so we spoke with, I think it was like 26 investors, and everyone said no. And everyone was spooked out just by the sheer pace at which we were growing our burn. And so one of the things we experimented with was we went out to find investors that had seen a lot of success in consumer transportation. So we looked at Uber's investors, we looked at Lyft investors, we looked at, investors that had backed all these like great consumer transportation companies. And First Round Capital was a seed investor in Uber. And we had the first call with them, and within 12 days, they closed a 12 million Series A financing in a massively oversubscribed Series A round. And one of the big learnings from that entire experience was the value of taking a data-driven approach when it comes to identifying the most likely investors. Specifically, the core insight was you could waste all of your time talking to investors that are not going to see the vision, or you could do a little bit of effort and you could really use data and intelligence to identify investors that are already investing in things that are adjacent to your company, that already sort of see the vision and thesis and are already excited about your operating space as seen by virtue of their prior investments. And so we've built a lot of tools around that I'm just going to take a moment to show here.
Yes, please.
Uh,
Let's do it. And this is what I was going to talk about. That it would be helpful for everyone to see what kind of intelligence, how can they actually like target investors using metal. I think it would be a super helpful way.
yeah, let's do it. Great. Samir, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is metal. And one of the most powerful things we've built is a set of tooling around investor discovery and research. So when founders first come here, this is a full operating system, right, for investor research and discovery. You can prompt in natural language. You can hit search. We're integrated into all the different APIs that are out there: Crunchbase, Dealroom, Fiber, all of that, right? And then here we can actually filter for investors that have made a certain minimum percentage of their investments in a given stage, right? Or you can filter for investors that have led rounds, that have led at least 20% of their portfolio investments in the past, right? And so with these filters, you can actually identify very specific types of investors based on their investing patterns. And then for a given investor, we show you a relevance flag, and it actually shows you why this investor is being flagged as having high relevance. Are they a stage fit? Are they a sector fit? Are they a geo fit? What similar investments have they made in companies that are similar to your company? And then, when you click on a given investor, you can see a ton of intelligence on that particular investor. What is their check size? What percent of the investments happen in your stage, or sector, or continent, 3-month, 12-month deal count, how much funds they've raised recently. What is their investing thesis? What investing thesis have they invested in that are most similar to your company? What companies have they backed within a particular investing thesis? What do those companies do? What is their investment velocity? Is it ramping up or ramping down? What percentage of their investments have they led historically? How frequently do they follow on investments? What is their valuation ranges in your particular stage? What is their sweet spot in terms of stages, sectors, right? And there's a ton of intelligence here that I'm not going to cover everything. And then you can actually put investors in different tags. You can, go to company search. You can look at similar companies. You can look at investors behind similar companies. You can actually look at content signals. So this is actually very, very powerful. This has data on every single investor podcast, every single social media post, every single blog post made by investors, and it surfaces investors that are talking about things that are adjacent to your product thesis. So for me, for example, this is surfacing investors and content around fundraising workflows or productivity software for startups, right? And then here, you can see all the new funds that are coming out on the market. You can filter based on stage and geography and sector and announcement date and fund size and all these different parameters, right? And this just what you're seeing here is the tip of the iceberg in terms of investor research and discovery. And so we've really built out the tools that allow founders to take a data-driven approach when it comes to identifying the most likely investors for their company. Once again, this goes back to my prior experience of really finding success at the intersection of using data and intelligence to identify the most likely investors and running the right process. So hopefully, to me, that brings a little bit of light into the art and science of identifying the most likely investors.
Yeah, 100%. I think that does that. I would also encourage the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to push forward any question. If you want us to, put in a specific query into Metal to find the right investors, show you the right investors, we're happy to do that too. So that would be like very, very helpful. Because I would love to, move to the second building block here. That once you have done your research, once you have, decided that this is the right investors that want to reach out, the problem that most founders then face is that you're like, oh, wait, I don't know anyone. Maybe I'm a first time founder, or maybe I just don't have the network to go out there and reach out to investors to get warm introductions to. Is that really the bottleneck, or is it something else? Or do founders actually do have the network, just don't know about it?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, this is so in topic, and this is one of the most common questions I get from founders. I think, based on data and based on our prior experience of the past, year and a half of building Metal, what we've learned is that it's not the absence or the lack of a network that holds founders back. It's typically not having the right visibility into who within your network can make introductions, with which investors. That lack of visibility is the core problem, right? And so for that, we've actually built some tooling again within Metal that very seamlessly and efficiently allows you to see who all you're connected with that can introduce you to a given investor. This is crucial. The reason this is crucial is because in any given raise process, you're going to have to speak with a large number of investors. And to speak with a large number of investors, you need a fairly large number of introduction requests that convert into investor meetings. And that requires a process. It cannot be something that is, event-based or serendipitous, right? And so how do you put a process behind that? Well, what we have done here is we have built the right tools to enable founders to do that. So how does it work? I click on a given investor. I can go to access here. Founders can see all the different people within their network that have raised from this particular investor. And how does Metal know who all you're connected to? Well, two data sources, Gmail and LinkedIn. So Metal integrates with your Gmail and is able to read your Gmail contact book and identify who you know based on who you received emails from. And secondly, Metal is also able to read your LinkedIn connections data. You can upload that manually, or you can do it with a couple of clicks with a LinkedIn integration. And then Metal is able to map that against industry records and show you all the founders you know that have raised capital from a given investor. So this view is just very, very powerful because it eliminates the need for all the research and allows founders to focus their time on actual problem solving, which is, how do I get access? Who do I call? Right? And how do I work with people to land introductions? You can also do the exact same thing at a pipeline level, right? So here I'm going to go to paths, and here I can use Metal to identify to first to say, okay, show me all of my intro pathways to investors that are a part of this particular pipeline. And then subsequently, I can actually see all the people I know that have raised capital from investors in my pipeline, right? So as an example, I can see that I know Anthony, and Anthony's connected with NFX. And the way he's connected with NFX is he raised an 8 million Series A from NFX in 2021. And so I know I can reach out to Anthony to learn more about NFX or get an introduction or whatever it might be. And so just being able to put a process and being able to have visibility into who you're connected with, and then being able to, see that on an ongoing basis as you add your LinkedIn connections, as you update your email data, everything here gets updated
Yeah.
automatically. But the key thing here is we don't base this on LinkedIn mutual connections, which may or may not be real. We base this on actual transactions data, which is why this is way more high fidelity than just, LinkedIn searches.
Cool. There is a really good question, and this is what I was like coming to just now, is that someone has asked that I noticed a lot of paths through co-investment. Is that a good path? Would VCs intro you to another VC? And I think this is like, one of the features that we have in Metal that you can actually see the path. So I would love to maybe for you to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an excellent question. Just for everyone's benefit, the question is, if I know an investor and that investor says, "Hey, I'm not going to invest in your company, but I can introduce you to other investors," is that a good idea or not? Right? In most cases, it's not a good idea. The reason it's not a good idea is because imagine if Samir and I are, investors, and I'm like, Samir, there's this great company. It's really great. You should speak with them. I'm not going to invest in this company, but you should invest in this company, right? And the first question somebody's going to think of is, well, if it's such a great company and if it's such a great opportunity, why is he not investing, right? And so there's negative signaling when you go in through an investor who's not investing in your company, but is introducing you to some other investor. Now, there are instances where there are exceptions to that, right? An exception to that would be, an investor that really likes your company, but you're just, too early stage for them or too late stage for them, right? So sometimes there's like some firms that are very, very rigid and they just don't invest in any companies outside of like a very defined stage. Um,
I think we're having a bit of a network problem. Right.
That is very, very powerful. That is very useful because with your existing investors, they're invested in your company. So when they reach out to another investor saying, "Hey, we invest in this company, you should look at them," that holds weight and that carries positive signaling. So you definitely want to use the co-investor paths and introductions, but you want to use it selectively and you want to use it for through your existing investors.
100%. Good. Thanks a lot. I think that's super, super helpful. And I hope that this is like it helps people visualize how they can like make their network more visible. I would love to move towards because we're very short on time, so I would love to move towards the third building block here. That is like the iteration when you're like raising a Series A round. So our proprietary data shows that median Series A round takes around 5 months. That is a big stretch of time. So, what should a founder be doing in that time process, or how did that like process look like for you, like when you were raising a Series A round? Because I'm sure there is a lot that you have to iterate on, and how do founders actually iterate on that? And when they're like going through the whole raise process.
Yeah, yeah, great, great question and great focus areas. So one of the most common things in a fundraising process is the necessity of iterations. So in a lot of cases, I would say in a majority of cases, the story or the narrative for the company that founders start with is typically not the narrative that they close around with. And the reason that matters is because obviously your forward-looking strategy is in a state of evolution as an early stage company. And venture bets are really based on, a forward-looking potential of what this business can become. And so, as you go through the fundraising process, you learn what's resonating and what's not resonating, and you iterate. And I think that ability to iterate and that ability to read the market signals is crucial in a fundraising process. Now, this is very conceptual in nature. Let's make that very, very specific, right? So how do I know I need to iterate on my strategy or my narrative for the company's path ahead, right? Well, there's actually indicators that help you see that, right? There's actually benchmarks you can use to assess what sort of a response your company is getting from capital markets. We'll talk about a few of these, right? So one of them is your inter-request opt-in rate, right? So for most founders, there's like about a 20 to 40% inter-request to opt-in rate. This means that if you reach out to 10 people, well, request an introduction, there should be at least two to four investors out of those 10 that receive an inter-request that should opt in. If your opt-in rate is less than 20%, then that means there's something off going on, right? Maybe you're not targeting the right investors. Maybe, you're pushing into requests to people you don't know well. Maybe your intro blurb and how you're, explaining your company is not as clear as it should be. Maybe the collateral is not top decile. There's something that's going on because you're getting a response in the market that's significantly below benchmark. Similarly, there's a benchmark for first, second meeting conversion. And that varies based on stage and sector, but there is a benchmark. And so for most founders, that benchmark is somewhere between 25 to 50%. So if you have 10 calls, right, at least two or three of those first calls should convert into a second call, generally speaking, right? Obviously, those percentages vary based on sector and stage and even geography. But if you have 10 investor calls and only one of them converts into a second call, like that's worth looking into. What are we? Maybe we need to iterate on how we talk about the company. Maybe we need to think a bit differently about how we're positioning the company
Yeah.
and the company's path forward and the strategy. The last thing I want to mention is that we are actually publishing these benchmarks for the first time on our website early next week
Yeah.
in what we refer to as our data desk, right? So we're actually publishing what these benchmarks look like for different sectors and different stages. And this is going to be on our website. Anyone can take a look. And that really equips founders to really, benchmark their fundraise against the industry and see if they're above benchmarks or below benchmarks and use that information to iterate and get smart. Last thing I want to point out is investor calls. Those are the biggest signals. Um, that really helps you sort of get a sense of what's resonating and what's not resonating, right? And so
And
paying very close attention and iterating on the narrative is crucial.
how do founders do that within Metal? Like, so this is what I was coming to that, you can iterate on your strategy, but you have to have some level of intelligence for that for you to be able to iterate on, right? So how can like founders do that today within Metal?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the most common ways in which we see founders doing that in Metal today is through by uploading their investor call transcripts and getting feedback from our in-app agent on based on our proprietary intelligence on the venture industry. And when founders do that, we actually see these patterns, right? Like there's clear patterns of founders that are closing quickly and they're hungry for that insight and analysis on how a certain call went. We have native, metal native note takers, and we have proprietary intelligence on the industry. And so our platform is actually very, very powerful in helping you see a lot of things about your investor calls, right? Is the investor really buying in, or is there conviction on their side? Are there patterns from one call to the next that are repeatedly coming up that you need to address? Are you talking about your company and structuring the call in a way that's compelling, right? So you get that feedback from Metal just by, having our note taker join your investor calls or just by uploading your investor call transcripts if you use other note takers. And by the way, we have a blanket privacy policy, same as, any other CRM like HubSpot or Addy or whatever it might be. So all your data is always yours. We can't do anything with it. We can't sell it. We can't share it. We can't do anything with it. So it's your personal data and it remains your personal data forever. But yeah, that's one way in which founders iterate. I think another way in which founders iterate is by partnering up with their existing investors, right? And getting some feedback on their collateral, on their decks, on their narrative, on their strategy. And then, using that feedback to sort of, move to the next version of their positioning.
100%. Good. Thanks a lot. I think these are like super sharp insights and so helpful for people who are in here. There are a few questions that I would love for us to take on. So someone has asked a very specific question that we would love to query sports data and technology investors in within Metal. So and they would love to understand how this works. So maybe we can like run a live query very, very quickly if I think we have, a few minutes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So let's look at some of the questions. So we have a question from Mike. What coverage does Metal have for pre-seed and seed VCs? Mike, we have comprehensive coverage. I think it would take very significant effort to find an investor that exists in the real world but is not there on Metal.
Yeah.
We're thinking of offering rewards for people who can do that, right? But it would take significant effort to do that, particularly in where our data is, I think, less powerful is on the periphery. So like that family office in Sri Lanka, right? Like that's where data is not, as accurate, but we have complete coverage of, venture capital at pre-seed, seed, Series A, even Series B, Series C stages. There's another question from Troy. You can query sports data and technology investors is more niche. So Troy, love the query. So Troy's query is, can we see, what investors have been active in the arena of sports data and technology? So Troy, this is what we do in the onboarding call. We set up your account. We train Metal on your company. We teach Metal what your company does, what your product does, who your, if you have existing investors, we feed that into the system. And then, in the onboarding call, we actually do exactly this, right? Like we query the system and we help you sort of identify investors that have made similar investments before. And so, that's exactly what we do in an onboarding call. There's an anonymous question of co-investments. We already addressed that. Uh, there's a question from Tom. We're targeting investors like Emerson Collective who have an emphasis around art and culture. We're building a world modeling, altering environment and marketplace. How do you use Metal to develop our shortlist, especially centered around investors like Emerson Collective who have an art and gaming thesis? Tom, this is an excellent question. There are some really powerful ways within Metal to do this. One of those ways is to use our proprietary investing thesis that we have built on each and every investor. So you can search for investors based on their, thesis. And then, we also have, subsectors focused on, creative arenas like arts and stuff like that. And then finally, the most granular and the most specific way, Tom, to achieve this is you can look at companies in and around art and gaming in natural language. You can search for those companies. You can build a list of those companies, and then you can actually surface investors behind those companies. And you can see which ones are relevant to your state, sector, geography, and so on and so forth. Because those are investors that have already invested in that sort of arena, however you define that arena. And in the most specific way of defining that is by pointing to specific companies and saying these are the companies that belong to a specific arena. Um, and then we'll take one final question before we, move into closing here. So any insight into market conditions for raising outside of AI raises? It's a great question, right? So I think the first, a common misconception in the venture industry we see very commonly these days is, thinking that AI is a sector in and of itself. Just like, the internet in the early 2000s, right? Like every single business in the world was benefiting in a big way from the internet, right? Similarly, every single business in the world today is benefiting from AI, and most products, even even in the physical world, right? Like businesses, even manufacturing businesses are benefiting enormously from AI, and they're using AI to build better products, to serve customers faster, to be more responsive to customer feedback. So, I think the difference between there's no such thing as an AI company, right? Every company is using AI in novel ways. Some companies are better than others, but AI is a part of every single product and company that's being built, even outside of software. Um, so I think that comes down to positioning and how we do see a lot of fundraisers outside of AI, right? In traditional sectors, right? So for example, we have some customers from the vertical takeoff and landing category. So VTOL, it's a subsector within manufacturing, that's taking off, and we see a lot of founders, VTOL founders using metal in novel ways, and so many other sectors. This is one of many, many examples. Um, One last question. We have a lot of aerospace and defense customers. Can we use Metal to research which investors are interested in investing specifically in our customers? Those would be high signal for us. Absolutely. I think this question is from Sean. This is exactly the superpower of Metal, Sean. This is exactly you can actually do this in less than 3 minutes in Metal. You can build a list of companies in aerospace and defense using natural language, and then you can see all the investors behind those companies, and you can further, drill down into those investors using granular filters and so on and so forth. Um,
Cool. I think we were right on time, Gul.
Awesome. Well, just, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Please feel free to reach out over email. If you're an existing customer, you should have a Slack channel. Please reach out to our team over Slack. We are really, making an intentional effort to sort of engage more with customers and talk more and have more of these sessions. And we're planning to do a session like this every month. And we're coming up with a theme where we talk about like different parts of the product every month. And particularly this one was focused particularly on Series A. Next time we're going to focus on access and relationship intelligence and some of the things we have coming there. Last thing I want to mention is that Metal is a rapidly evolving product. We have a lot of new things coming out. And so, really excited to announce some new launches in the next few months. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Samir, for hosting, and
100%.
have a great day, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.